The year is 48 BC. Alexandria, a jewel on the Egyptian coast, pulsates with life. The air hangs thick with the scent of incense, spices from the east, and the faint, ever-present aroma of the Nile. Marble gleams under the relentless sun, reflecting the opulence that defines this ancient city. Here, amidst the bustling marketplaces, the towering lighthouse and the labyrinthine palaces, reigns Cleopatra the Seventh Philopator, Queen of Egypt. Cleopatra reclines on a cushioned chaise lounge, draped in flowing silks of vibrant azure and gold. Her dark hair, intricately braided and adorned with precious stones, frames a face of striking beauty and intelligence. Her eyes, pools of deep brown, hold a gaze that is both captivating and unsettling. A delicate gold serpent armband coils around her upper arm, a symbol of her royal lineage and her connection to the ancient gods of Egypt. Around her, the royal court hums with activity. Servants bearing trays laden with delicacies, dates, figs, honey cakes move with silent grace. Musicians play soft melodic tunes on lyres and flutes, creating a soothing ambiance. Scribes diligently record decrees and correspondence, their quills scratching across papyrus. Diplomats from distant lands whisper in hushed tones, vying for the queen's attention and favor. Cleopatra surveys the scene with a discerning eye. She is a master of observation, acutely aware of every nuance of power and intrigue that permeates her court. She understands that her position is precarious, a delicate balancing act between maintaining Egypt's independence and appeasing the ever-growing power of Rome. Egypt is wealthy, a granary for the Mediterranean world, but its military strength is no match for the legions of Rome. She takes a sip of wine from a goblet crafted from crystal, the liquid ruby red in the light. Charmian, her most trusted advisor and confidant, kneels at her side, whispering updates on the latest political developments. Charmian is more than just a servant. She is a friend, a loyal companion who has been with Cleopatra since childhood. Her wisdom and discretion are invaluable to the queen. The Roman Senate continues to debate the Egyptian debt, Your Majesty, Charmian says, her voice barely audible above the music. They grow increasingly impatient for repayment. Cleopatra sighs softly. The debt, incurred by her father, Ptolemy XII Auletes, to bribe the Romans for recognition of his rule, is a constant burden. It hangs over Egypt like a dark cloud, threatening to engulf the kingdom in financial ruin. Remind our ambassadors in Rome to emphasize Egypt's stability and continued support for Roman trade, Cleopatra replies, her voice calm and measured. Stress the importance of maintaining a strong and reliable ally in the East. She knows that words are not enough. She must offer Rome something more tangible, something that will secure their continued support and protect Egypt from annexation. But what? That is the question that plagues her. A flicker of movement at the edge of her vision catches her attention. Her younger sister, Arsinoe, stands near a pillar, watching her with barely concealed resentment. Arsinoe is ambitious and headstrong, and has always resented Cleopatra's position as the primary heir to the throne. Since their father's passing and Cleopatra's ascension, the animosity has only intensified. While outwardly polite, Arsinoe's eyes betray a constant undercurrent of defiance and envy. The forced marriage to Ptolemy XIII, her younger brother, further complicates matters. The brother-sister dynamic is wrought with tension, a silent battle for control masked beneath a veneer of familial obligation. Cleopatra ignores her sister's gaze, refusing to acknowledge the simmering rivalry. She has more pressing matters to consider. Her brother Ptolemy XIII, though nominally her co-ruler and husband, is a puppet of his advisors, a group of ambitious and unscrupulous men who seek to undermine her authority and seize power for themselves. They whisper in his ear, poisoning his mind against her, and plotting to depose her from the throne. The death of their father, Ptolemy XII, had thrown Egypt into chaos. His will stipulated that Cleopatra and Ptolemy XIII should rule jointly, but the arrangement was inherently unstable. The advisors, eager to consolidate their own power, exploited the siblings' rivalry and fostered discord between them. Cleopatra, acutely aware of the danger, had attempted to maintain a semblance of cooperation, but her efforts were consistently thwarted by her brother's advisors. One of the advisors, Pothinus, a eunuch with a viperous tongue and an insatiable hunger for power, is particularly troublesome. He is the mastermind behind many of the plots against her, and his influence over Ptolemy XIII is absolute. Cleopatra knows that she must find a way to neutralize Pothinus if she is to secure her position and protect Egypt from his machinations. Another advisor, Theodotus of Chios, is equally dangerous. A scholar and rhetorician, He uses his considerable intellect to manipulate Ptolemy XIII and sway public opinion against Cleopatra. He is a master of propaganda, skillfully crafting narratives that portray her as a foreign usurper, despite her Macedonian Greek heritage that was common among the Ptolemaic rulers. A third advisor, Achilles, commands the royal army, a formidable force that could easily be turned against her. He is a ruthless and ambitious general, eager to prove his loyalty to Ptolemy XIII and advance his own career. Cleopatra knows that she must tread carefully with Achilles, lest she provoke him into open rebellion. She rises from her chaise lounge and walks to a balcony overlooking the harbor. The sun glints off the water, creating a dazzling spectacle of light. Ships from all corners of the Mediterranean bob gently at anchor, their holds filled with goods from distant lands. Alexandria is a hub of international trade, a cosmopolitan city where cultures and ideas mingle freely. She leans against the railing, her gaze fixed on the horizon. She is a queen, yes, but also a strategist, a diplomat, a scholar, and a survivor. She has learned to navigate the treacherous currents of politics, to outwit her enemies, and to protect her kingdom at all costs. She is determined to maintain Egypt's independence, to preserve its ancient culture, and to secure her dynasty's future. Egypt will not fall, she whispers to herself, her voice filled with conviction. I will not allow it. A servant approaches bearing a message sealed with the royal crest. Cleopatra breaks the seal and reads the contents with a growing sense of unease. What is it, Your Majesty? Charmian asks, her voice filled with concern. It is from our envoy in Rome, Cleopatra replies, her brow furrowed. Julius Caesar has defeated Pompey at Pharsalus. Pompey is fleeing, seeking refuge in Egypt. The news sends a shockwave through the court. Pompey, the great Roman general, defeated by Caesar. The implications are enormous. Egypt is now caught in the middle of a Roman civil war. Cleopatra knows that Pompey's arrival will bring both opportunity and danger. He is a powerful man with many allies in Rome. Supporting him could earn Egypt favor with a significant faction in the Roman Senate. However, it could also provoke the wrath of Caesar, who is now the most powerful man in the Roman world. She turns to Charmian, her eyes gleaming with determination. We must prepare for Pompey's arrival, she says, and we must be ready to deal with Caesar. The atmosphere in the court shifts. The music stops and the conversations die down. A sense of anticipation and apprehension fills the air. Everyone knows that Egypt is on the brink of a major turning point. Cleopatra walks back to her throne, her steps firm and resolute. She is ready to face whatever challenges lie ahead. She is the queen of Egypt, and she will defend her kingdom with every ounce of her strength and intelligence. The serpent armband gleams under the light, a silent promise of her unwavering commitment to her people. Later that evening, after the court has dispersed and the palace is quiet, Cleopatra sits alone in her private chamber, poring over maps and scrolls. She is studying the strategic layout of Alexandria, analyzing its defenses, and considering the various scenarios that could unfold with Pompey's arrival and Caesar's inevitable pursuit. Charmian enters the chamber, carrying a tray with a light supper. She places the tray on a table and approaches Cleopatra, her face etched with concern. Your Majesty, you must rest, she says. You have been working tirelessly. I cannot rest, Charmian, Cleopatra replies, her eyes fixed on the maps. Egypt's future is at stake. I must be prepared for anything. She picks up a scroll detailing the history of Roman involvement in Egyptian affairs. She reads about the Roman conquest of Greece, the annexation of Syria, and the growing Roman influence in the eastern Mediterranean. She knows that Rome's ambition is limitless, and that Egypt is a prime target for Roman expansion. We are surrounded by wolves, Charmian, she says, her voice filled with weariness. Rome is growing stronger every day, and our neighbors are weak and divided. Egypt is the only power in the East that can resist Roman domination. But we cannot resist them alone, Your Majesty, Charmian replies. We need allies. We need strength. Cleopatra nods slowly. She knows that Charmian is right. Egypt cannot stand against Rome alone. She must find a way to secure alliances, to strengthen her military, and to bolster her kingdom's economy. She must play the game of politics with skill and cunning, using every weapon at her disposal, diplomacy, intrigue, and even seduction, to protect Egypt from the Roman threat. She closes the scroll and looks up at Charmian, her eyes filled with determination. I will do whatever it takes to protect Egypt, she says. I will make alliances with whoever is necessary. I will use whatever means are required. I will not let Egypt fall. She stands up and walks to a window overlooking the city. Alexandria is a tapestry of light and shadow, a vibrant and complex metropolis that is the heart of Egypt. She is the queen of this city, the protector of its people, and the guardian of its ancient heritage. She will not fail them. She turns to the camera, a playful glint in her eye. These are trying times indeed, but Egypt will endure, and I plan to show you all exactly how. If you wish to witness my journey, to see how a queen navigates treachery and power, please subscribe and like this video. The story of Egypt is just beginning. The lavish banquet continued late into the Alexandrian night, the air thick with the scent of imported spices, perfumed oils, and the sweet tang of fermenting grapes. Cleopatra, resplendent in a gown of shimmering silk the color of the Nile at dawn, held court. Around her, courtiers laughed, artists displayed their skills, and diplomats whispered veiled promises. Charmian, ever watchful, stood close, her dark eyes scanning the faces in the crowd, discerning threat from flattery, truth from deception. The queen, however, seemed unconcerned, her attention fixed on a Greek philosopher expounding on the nature of power. Power, Cleopatra mused, tilting her head, a single emerald earring glinting in the candlelight, is not merely dominion, but the ability to shape perception, to make others believe what you wish them to believe. Charmian leaned in, her voice a soft murmur. That is a valuable skill, Majesty, and one you wield with considerable finesse. However, perception can be fleeting. Rome's perception of Egypt in particular is shifting. The Senate grows ever more avaricious. Cleopatra's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Rome, always Rome. They are a hydra, Charmian. Cut off one head and two more appear. But Egypt is not without teeth of her own. We must simply ensure those teeth are sharp, and that Rome understands the cost of provoking us. She raised her goblet. To Egypt, may she forever endure. The assembled guests echoed her toast, their voices a wave of loyalty washing over her. But even in the midst of this display of fealty, a shadow lingered. News had reached Alexandria, whispered on the winds of the Mediterranean, tales of civil war tearing apart the Roman Republic. Caesar, the ambitious general, pursued Pompey, his rival, across the seas. Egypt, caught between these titans, teetered on the brink of becoming a pawn in their game. Then, the unthinkable happened. A messenger, breathless and pale, burst into the banquet hall, disrupting the carefully orchestrated scene. He stumbled, nearly falling, before dropping to his knees before Cleopatra. Majesty, he gasped, his voice trembling. Pompey, he is dead. He has been murdered on Egyptian soil. A hush fell over the hall, silencing the music, the laughter, the whispers. Cleopatra's face remained impassive, but her eyes, narrowed and focused, betrayed the turmoil within. This was a seismic shift, a rupture in the fragile equilibrium she had so meticulously maintained. Pompey, though a fugitive, was still a figure of immense power, a Roman consul, a man with allies and influence. His death in Egypt would have repercussions. Who is responsible? She demanded, her voice sharp and cold. The regents of Ptolemy XIII, Majesty. They believed they were acting in Egypt's best interests, hoping to curry favor with Caesar. Cleopatra rose from her throne, her movements fluid and graceful, yet radiating an aura of barely contained fury. Fools, utter fools. They have signed Egypt's death warrant with their incompetence. Did they truly believe Caesar would reward such treachery? They understand nothing of Rome, nothing of power. She turned to Charmian. Send word to the harbor. Prepare the royal barge. I must meet with Caesar. The news spread through Alexandria like wildfire, carried on the backs of panicked servants and gossiping merchants. The arrival of Julius Caesar, the all-conquering Roman general, had been anticipated with a mixture of dread and morbid curiosity. But the murder of Pompey transformed anticipation into palpable fear. Ptolemy XIII, barely a man, a puppet manipulated by ambitious advisors, had made a grave miscalculation. Pothinus, the eunuch who held considerable sway over Ptolemy XIII, paced nervously in the royal palace. The advisors, Theodotus of Chios and Achilles, stood beside him, their faces etched with apprehension. We acted for the good of Egypt, Pothinus insisted, his voice shrill. Caesar will be grateful. Pompey was a threat. Grateful? Theodotus scoffed. Caesar is not a man easily swayed by such crude gestures. We have insulted him, Pothinus. We have shown him that we are capable of treachery. He will never trust us. Achilles, the commander of the Egyptian army, remained silent, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. He was a man of action, not words. but he understood the gravity of the situation. They had gambled, and they had lost. Meanwhile, Cleopatra prepared to meet Caesar. She understood that this encounter would determine the fate of Egypt. She could not rely on her brother, Ptolemy XIII, to protect their kingdom. He was weak, easily manipulated, and blinded by ambition. She had to take control. But how to reach Caesar? Ptolemy XIII, aware of her ambition and her claim to the throne, had placed her under virtual house arrest, hoping to prevent her from gaining influence with the Roman general. The harbor was heavily guarded, and her every move was watched. Charmian approached Cleopatra, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of concern and determination. "Majesty, I have a plan. It is risky, but it is our only chance." The plan was audacious, bordering on reckless. Cleopatra would be smuggled into Caesar's presence, concealed within a roll of carpets, delivered as a gift to the Roman general. It was a desperate gamble, but Cleopatra saw no other option. Under the cover of darkness, the scheme was put into motion. Cleopatra, wrapped tightly in layers of intricately woven carpets, was carried by a group of loyal servants towards the harbor. The guards, bribed and deceived, allowed the gift to pass through. The barge carrying the carpet arrived at the Roman flagship. Caesar, weary from battle and disillusioned by the treachery he had witnessed in Egypt, sat alone in his cabin, poring over maps and dispatches. He was a brilliant strategist, a ruthless conqueror, but even he felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. A Roman centurion approached him. "General, a gift has arrived from the Egyptian court. It is said to be a carpet of exceptional beauty." Caesar, in no mood for frivolous distractions, waved his hand dismissively. "Send it away. I have no time for such trifles." "With respect, General," the centurion persisted, "the bearers insist that only you may unroll it. They claim it contains a message of great importance." Intrigued, Caesar relented. "Very well. Bring it in." The carpet was unrolled before him, revealing not a tapestry of intricate designs, but a woman of unparalleled beauty and regal bearing. Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, stood before Julius Caesar, her eyes blazing with intelligence and determination. Caesar was taken aback. He had expected a desperate plea for help, perhaps a display of wealth. He had not anticipated such audacity, such raw courage. He studied her intently, recognizing the fire in her eyes, the unwavering resolve in her stance. This was no ordinary queen. "I am Cleopatra," she announced, her voice clear and strong despite the circumstances, "Queen of Egypt, and I have come to offer you my allegiance and my wisdom." Caesar listened as Cleopatra spoke, outlining her vision for Egypt, her understanding of Roman politics, her assessment of the threats facing both their empires. He was impressed by her intelligence, her political acumen, and her unwavering commitment to her kingdom. He saw in her a kindred spirit, a ruler who understood the ruthless game of power. He also saw an opportunity. Egypt was rich in resources, strategically located, and vital to Rome's ambitions. With Cleopatra as an ally, he could secure Egypt's loyalty and solidify his control over the eastern Mediterranean. But Ptolemy XIII and his advisors would not surrender power easily. They would fight to maintain their control, and they would use any means necessary to undermine Cleopatra and Caesar. The following days were filled with tension and intrigue. Cleopatra, with Caesar's support, began to rally her loyalists and undermine Ptolemy XIII's authority. She used her charisma and her influence to sway the Egyptian people, reminding them of her lineage, her commitment to their well-being, and the folly of opposing Rome. Ptolemy XIII, enraged by Cleopatra's defiance and Caesar's interference, began to mobilize his army. He spread rumors and propaganda, painting Cleopatra as a traitor, a Roman puppet, a threat to Egyptian sovereignty. He accused Caesar of being a tyrant, an invader intent on plundering Egypt's wealth. The situation quickly deteriorated. Alexandria became a city of whispers and shadows, of secret meetings and hidden alliances. The streets were filled with armed soldiers, both Egyptian and Roman, their presence a constant reminder of the impending conflict. Arsinoe, Cleopatra's younger sister, fueled by her own ambition and resentment, saw an opportunity to seize power. She secretly conspired with Ptolemy XIII's advisors, promising them her support in exchange for their backing. She believed that with Ptolemy XIII and Cleopatra out of the way, she could become the sole ruler of Egypt. One night, Arsinoe slipped away from the palace, disguised as a commoner, and made her way to the Egyptian army camp. She addressed the soldiers, inciting them to rebellion against Caesar and Cleopatra. She promised them riches and glory if they would fight for her, for Egypt, for their freedom. Her words resonated with many of the soldiers, who were already resentful of the Roman presence and suspicious of Cleopatra's intentions. They pledged their allegiance to Arsinoe, vowing to fight to the death to defend their homeland. With Arsinoe's support, Ptolemy XIII felt emboldened. He issued a public decree, denouncing Cleopatra and Caesar as enemies of Egypt and declaring war against them. The Alexandrian War had begun. The conflict erupted with sudden and brutal force. Egyptian soldiers attacked Roman outposts, ambushed patrols, and laid siege to the royal palace, where Cleopatra and Caesar were holed up. The streets of Alexandria became a battleground, filled with the sounds of clashing steel, the screams of the wounded, and the roar of burning buildings. Cleopatra, despite the chaos and danger, remained calm and resolute. She helped to organize the defense of the palace, issuing orders, tending to the wounded, and inspiring the Roman soldiers with her courage and determination. She knew that the fate of Egypt and her own life depended on their ability to withstand the onslaught. Caesar, a seasoned warrior, took command of the Roman forces. He organized his troops, planned his strategies, and led the defense with skill and ruthlessness. He was determined to crush Ptolemy XIII's rebellion and secure his control over Egypt. The fighting was fierce and unrelenting. The Egyptian army, though larger in number, lacked the discipline and experience of the Roman legions. Caesar's troops, hardened by years of war, fought with unwavering resolve, repelling the Egyptian attacks and inflicting heavy casualties. But the Egyptians were not easily defeated. They knew the city intimately, using its narrow streets and hidden alleyways to their advantage. They launched surprise attacks, set ambushes, and harassed the Roman forces at every turn. The Great Library of Alexandria, a repository of ancient knowledge and a symbol of Egyptian culture, became caught in the crossfire. A stray fire, ignited by a Roman siege engine, spread rapidly through the library's wooden structures, consuming priceless scrolls and ancient texts. The loss was incalculable, a devastating blow to Egypt's cultural heritage. Cleopatra watched in horror as the flames engulfed the library, the smoke billowing into the sky like a funeral pyre. She felt a pang of grief, not only for the loss of knowledge, but also for the loss of innocence, the destruction of a legacy that had endured for centuries. This war was not only a battle for power, it was a battle for the soul of Egypt. As the fighting intensified, the situation inside the royal palace grew increasingly desperate. The palace was under constant siege, and the defenders were running low on supplies. Food and water were scarce, and disease began to spread through the ranks. Cleopatra knew that they could not hold out forever. They needed reinforcements, and they needed them soon. But the Roman fleet, under siege in the harbor, was unable to break through the Egyptian blockade. Then, a glimmer of hope appeared. A small Roman ship, defying the odds, managed to slip through the blockade and reach the open sea. The ship carried a message from Caesar, pleading for reinforcements from Rome. But the journey to Rome was long and perilous, and there was no guarantee that help would arrive in time. Cleopatra and Caesar were trapped, surrounded by enemies, their fate hanging in the balance. One night, as Cleopatra stood on the palace walls, watching the fires burn across the city, Caesar approached her. His face was grim, his eyes tired, but his resolve remained unbroken. "We are in a difficult situation," he said, his voice low, "but we must not lose hope. Rome will come to our aid. I have no doubt of it." Cleopatra turned to him, her eyes filled with admiration and gratitude. "I know that you will do everything in your power to save us, Caesar. But I also know that the outcome is uncertain. If we fail, Egypt will fall, and I will not allow that to happen." She looked out over the city, her gaze sweeping across the burning buildings and the blood-stained streets. "I will fight for Egypt, Caesar. I will fight to the death, and if I must die, I will die as a queen, defending her kingdom to the last." Caesar took her hand in his grip firm and reassuring. "You are a remarkable woman, Cleopatra, and you are not alone. We will face this together. We will fight together, and we will prevail." But even as he spoke those words of encouragement, a sense of unease settled over them. The Alexandrian War was far from over, and the future of Egypt remained uncertain. The chaos had only just begun. The tension spiraled, the balance teetered. It was a maelstrom of mistrust, treachery, and the ever-present threat of a devastating defeat. Safety was a forgotten luxury. The ending was shrouded in doubt, the resolution a distant and fragile hope. Ptolemy XIII, emboldened by advisors who whispered promises of sole power, formally declared war, not against Caesar directly, at least not initially, but against Cleopatra, framing her as a traitorous puppet of Rome. The first volley came in the form of riots orchestrated within the city, targeting those known to be loyal to the queen. Homes were set ablaze, shops looted, and the streets became a chaotic tapestry of fear and violence. Cleopatra, safely within the fortified royal palace alongside Caesar and his legionaries, watched the unfolding turmoil with a chilling sense of dread. Her city, once a beacon of learning and prosperity, was now consumed by internecine strife. The fighting escalated rapidly. Ptolemy forces, comprised largely of Egyptian soldiers and mercenaries, launched a full-scale assault on the palace. Arrows rained down upon the walls, catapults hurled stones that crashed against the ramparts, and siege towers lumbered towards the fortifications, threatening to overwhelm the defenders. Caesar's legions, though outnumbered, were seasoned veterans, their discipline and training proving to be a formidable obstacle. They fought with a ruthlessness that stemmed from years of campaigning, their shields forming an impenetrable wall against the onslaught. Inside the palace, the atmosphere was one of tense anticipation, mixed with grim determination. Cleopatra moved with purpose, coordinating the defense, issuing orders to her loyal guards, and tending to the wounded. She understood the gravity of the situation. If the palace fell, both she and Caesar would be captured, and Egypt would be plunged into a bloody civil war. She knew that the fate of her kingdom hung in the balance. Arsinoe, Cleopatra's younger sister, had been relegated to the background, seemingly subdued and compliant. But beneath her demure facade, a viperous ambition festered. Sensing an opportunity to seize power for herself, she secretly contacted Ptolemy generals, offering her support in exchange for recognition as the rightful ruler of Egypt. Her betrayal was a dagger to Cleopatra's heart, a painful reminder of the ruthlessness of political maneuvering. One night, under the cloak of darkness, Arsinoe slipped away from the palace, aided by a handful of disgruntled guards. She made her way to Ptolemy camp, where she was greeted with open arms. Her arrival boosted the morale of Ptolemy troops, who saw her as a symbol of resistance against Roman influence. Arsinoe, playing her part to perfection, addressed the soldiers, stirring up their hatred for Cleopatra and Caesar, promising them a return to the old ways, free from foreign interference. With Arsinoe at his side, Ptolemy launched a renewed offensive, pressing the attack on the palace with even greater ferocity. The fighting raged day and night, turning the once magnificent city into a smoldering ruin. Buildings crumbled under the relentless barrage of missiles, and the streets were littered with the bodies of the dead and dying. The air was thick with the stench of smoke and blood. During one particularly intense assault, a fire broke out in the great library of Alexandria, one of the most renowned centers of learning in the ancient world. The flames spread rapidly, consuming countless scrolls and manuscripts, destroying centuries of accumulated knowledge. The loss was incalculable, a tragedy that resonated throughout the world. Cleopatra watched in horror as the flames engulfed the library, her heart heavy with despair. It felt like a personal attack, a symbolic destruction of everything she held dear. The siege continued for months, each day bringing new challenges and hardships. Food and water became scarce, disease spread through the city, and the morale of the defenders began to waver. Caesar, ever the pragmatist, realized that they needed to break the siege if they were to survive. He organized a series of sorties, leading his troops in daring raids against Ptolemy forces, disrupting their supply lines and inflicting heavy casualties. Cleopatra, despite the danger, insisted on accompanying Caesar on some of these forays, demonstrating her courage and resolve. She fought alongside her soldiers, wielding a sword and shield, inspiring them with her unwavering spirit. Her presence on the battlefield rallied the troops and reminded them of what they were fighting for: the survival of Egypt and the preservation of their way of life. One day, while returning from a particularly successful raid, Cleopatra and Caesar were ambushed by a group of Ptolemy soldiers. A fierce battle ensued, with both sides fighting with desperate intensity. Cleopatra, caught in the thick of the fighting, found herself surrounded by enemies. She fought bravely, but she was outnumbered and outmatched. Just as she was about to be overwhelmed, Caesar intervened, cutting down her attackers with swift and decisive strokes. He pulled her to safety, his face grim with concern. The ambush served as a stark reminder of the dangers they faced and the precariousness of their situation. Caesar realized that he needed to act quickly if he was to secure Cleopatra's throne and ensure the stability of Egypt. He decided to launch a decisive attack against Ptolemy's main forces, hoping to break the siege once and for all. He gathered his troops and prepared for battle. Cleopatra, determined to play her part, donned her armor and joined him on the battlefield. Together, They led the charge against Ptolemy's army, their combined forces unleashing a torrent of destruction. The fighting was fierce and brutal, with both sides suffering heavy losses. In the midst of the chaos, Ptolemy, desperate to turn the tide of the battle, led a contingent of his troops in a direct assault on Caesar's position. The two leaders clashed in a furious duel, their swords flashing in the sunlight. Caesar, with his superior skill and experience, quickly gained the upper hand. He disarmed Ptolemy and stood poised to deliver the final blow. But before he could strike, a stray arrow pierced Ptolemy's chest. He staggered backwards, clutching at the wound, his eyes wide with disbelief. He collapsed to the ground, his lifeblood staining the sand. With Ptolemy dead, his army quickly disintegrated, their morale shattered. The remaining soldiers surrendered, and the Alexandrian War came to an end. Arsinoe, witnessing the defeat of Ptolemy's forces, attempted to flee the battlefield, but she was captured by Caesar's troops. She was brought before Cleopatra, her eyes filled with fear and resentment. Cleopatra, though deeply hurt by her sister's betrayal, showed her mercy. She spared Arsinoe's life, but she banished her from Egypt, sending her into exile. With Ptolemy dead and Arsinoe banished, Cleopatra was now the undisputed ruler of Egypt, her throne secured by the power of Rome. She stood alongside Caesar as he addressed the victorious troops, her head held high, her eyes shining with pride and determination. News of Caesar's victory in Alexandria spread quickly throughout the Roman world. He was hailed as a hero, the man who had brought peace and stability to Egypt. But his actions also raised concerns among his rivals in Rome, who saw his growing power as a threat to the Republic. Cleopatra, meanwhile, focused on rebuilding her kingdom, repairing the damage caused by the war, and restoring Alexandria to its former glory. She worked tirelessly to improve the lives of her people, investing in infrastructure, promoting trade, and fostering education. She also began to cultivate a closer relationship with Caesar, recognizing him as a powerful ally who could help her secure Egypt's future. Months later, Cleopatra gave birth to a son, whom she named Caesarion, meaning Little Caesar. The birth of Caesarion solidified the bond between Cleopatra and Caesar, and it ensured the continuation of her dynasty. She hoped that one day Caesarion would rule Egypt as a strong and independent leader, free from the control of Rome. Caesar, however, was preoccupied with affairs in Rome. He was embroiled in a bitter power struggle with his rivals, and he knew that he would eventually have to return to the capital to defend his position. Before leaving Egypt, he made Cleopatra a promise. He would always be there for her and for Egypt, and he would do everything in his power to protect her kingdom from harm. With a heavy heart, Cleopatra bid farewell to Caesar, knowing that their time together was limited. She watched as his ship sailed away, carrying him back to Rome, leaving her alone to rule Egypt and face the challenges that lay ahead. The victory felt fragile, fleeting, as though the foundations of her power were built on sand. She couldn't shake the feeling that the Roman influence, like a creeping vine, would eventually choke the life out of her beloved Egypt. The end of the Alexandrian War was not a true resolution, but a temporary reprieve. The internal strife had subsided, but the external threat of Rome loomed larger than ever. Cleopatra, now a mother and a sole ruler, understood the delicate balance she had to maintain. Egypt's survival depended on her ability to navigate the treacherous waters of Roman politics, to play the game of power with cunning and skill. The partially burned Great Library stood as a stark reminder of the costs of war and the fragility of knowledge. It was a symbol of what had been lost, but also a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Cleopatra vowed to rebuild the library, to restore it to its former glory, and to ensure that Alexandria would once again be a center of learning and culture. She was a queen, a mother, and a survivor. She had faced down her enemies, overcome adversity, and secured her throne. But she knew that her reign was far from over, and that the fight for Egypt's survival would continue. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: Cleopatra would not surrender. She would fight to the very end to protect her kingdom and her people, even if it meant sacrificing everything she held dear. As Caesar's ships disappeared over the horizon, Cleopatra stood on the shores of Alexandria, gazing out at the vast expanse of the Mediterranean Sea. The sun beat down upon her face, but her eyes remained fixed on the horizon, searching for a sign, a glimpse of hope in the uncertain future. She was the queen of the Nile, the last pharaoh of Egypt, and she would not let her kingdom fall without a fight. The taste of victory was laced with the bitter knowledge that the true battle had only just begun. The chaos of war had subsided, leaving in its wake a chilling calm, the quiet before a storm that threatened to engulf everything she held dear. The serpent of the Nile was coiled, ready to strike, but the hunter was closing in, and the sands of time were running out. With Ptolemy XIII's lifeless body recovered from the Nile, Cleopatra stood as the undisputed ruler of Egypt, a position solidified not merely by birthright, but by strategic alliance and decisive action. The Alexandrian War, a brutal and chaotic affair, had reshaped the political landscape, leaving behind a city scarred by conflict, but also a kingdom secured, at least for the moment, under her command. Caesar, having orchestrated Ptolemy XIII's demise and secured a Roman victory, wasted no time in consolidating his influence. The remnants of Ptolemy XIII's loyalists were swiftly dealt with, their power dismantled, their threats neutralized. Alexandria, once a city divided, was now firmly under Roman control, though nominally ruled by its queen. The months that followed were a whirlwind of reconstruction and consolidation. Cleopatra, ever the pragmatist, understood the necessity of restoring order and stability to her kingdom. She initiated ambitious projects aimed at revitalizing Alexandria, repairing the damage inflicted by the war, and bolstering the economy. Granaries were replenished, trade routes were reopened, and the city began to slowly recover from the trauma it had endured. Cleopatra, however, never forgot the fragility of her position. She recognized that her power was inextricably linked to Caesar's, and that the future of Egypt depended on maintaining a strong alliance with Rome. In the midst of the political and economic reconstruction, a new life stirred within Cleopatra. She carried Caesar's child, a son who would be named Caesarion, a symbolic gesture proclaiming his lineage and asserting his claim to both Egyptian and Roman heritage. The birth of Caesarion was a momentous occasion, celebrated throughout Egypt with lavish festivities and grand pronouncements. For Cleopatra, Caesarion represented more than just a son. He was a symbol of hope, a testament to her strategic brilliance, and a guarantee, she hoped, of her dynasty's continued survival. Caesar recognized the political importance of Caesarion. However, Caesar's stay in Egypt was not indefinite. His responsibilities in Rome demanded his return, and after months of solidifying his control and ensuring Cleopatra's stability, he prepared to depart. The departure was bittersweet. While Cleopatra understood the necessity of Caesar's return to Rome, she couldn't ignore the apprehension that gnawed at her. Caesar's departure left her vulnerable, still shadowed by potential enemies and dependent on the fickle tides of Roman politics. Before leaving, Caesar installed a Roman garrison in Alexandria, ostensibly to protect Cleopatra and Egypt from external threats, but also serving as a constant reminder of Rome's ever-present influence. Arsinoe, Cleopatra's ambitious and treacherous sister, remained a thorn in Cleopatra's side. Her betrayal during the Alexandrian War had not been forgotten, and Cleopatra knew that as long as Arsinoe lived, she would pose a threat to her rule. After much deliberation, Cleopatra petitioned Caesar to have Arsinoe removed from Alexandria. Caesar, recognizing the potential for future unrest, agreed to Cleopatra's request. Arsinoe was exiled to the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, a gilded cage far from the political intrigues of Egypt. With Caesar gone and Arsinoe exiled, Cleopatra focused on strengthening her position and preparing for whatever the future might hold. She continued to cultivate her image as a powerful and benevolent ruler, overseeing ambitious building projects, patronizing the arts and sciences, and fostering trade and diplomacy. She maintained a close relationship with Rome, sending lavish gifts and delegations to curry favor with Caesar and other influential Roman figures. She never allowed herself to become complacent, understanding that the survival of Egypt depended on her constant vigilance and strategic acumen. 3 years passed. Egypt prospered under Cleopatra's rule, its economy flourished, and its cultural influence continued to spread throughout the Mediterranean world. But even as Egypt thrived, Rome was engulfed in political turmoil. Caesar's growing power and ambition had alienated many senators who feared he was becoming a tyrant. In March of 44 BC, Caesar was assassinated in the Roman Senate, his death plunging Rome into a period of chaos and civil war. The news of Caesar's assassination reached Cleopatra like a thunderbolt. She was devastated by the loss of her ally and lover, but also terrified by the implications for Egypt. With Caesar gone, the delicate balance of power in the Mediterranean had been shattered, and Cleopatra knew that Egypt would be vulnerable to the ambitions of Rome's new leaders. The Roman garrison in Alexandria, once a symbol of protection, now felt like a cage. In the wake of Caesar's assassination, Rome was carved up by ambitious men, his former allies vying for control of the vast republic. Among them were Mark Antony, a charismatic general and Caesar's close confidant; Octavian, Caesar's adopted son and heir; and Lepidus, a powerful politician. These three men formed the Second Triumvirate, an alliance forged to restore order to Rome and avenge Caesar's death. Cleopatra watched these developments with increasing unease. She knew that the Second Triumvirate would eventually turn its attention to Egypt, and she began to prepare for the inevitable conflict. She strengthened her military, fortified her defenses, and sought alliances with other regional powers. She also dispatched envoys to Rome, hoping to gain the favor of the triumvirs and secure Egypt's position in the new Roman order. Mark Antony, tasked with governing the eastern provinces of Rome, summoned Cleopatra to Tarsus in 41 BC. He had heard tales of her beauty, intelligence, and political acumen, and he sought her support in his campaign against the Parthians, Rome's eastern rivals. Cleopatra, recognizing the opportunity to forge a new alliance, agreed to meet with Antony. Her arrival in Tarsus was nothing short of legendary. She sailed up the Cydnus River on a magnificent barge, its stern adorned with gold, its sails of purple silk and its oars of silver. She reclined beneath a canopy of gold, dressed as Venus, the goddess of love, while cupids fanned her and attendants perfumed the air. The spectacle was designed to impress Antony and showcase Cleopatra's wealth and power. Antony was completely captivated by Cleopatra. He was drawn to her beauty, her intelligence, and her undeniable charisma. He was also impressed by her political savvy and her willingness to cooperate with Rome. Cleopatra, in turn, saw Antony as a powerful ally who could protect Egypt from the ambitions of Octavian and the other triumvirs. The two quickly became lovers, forging a bond that would have profound consequences for both Egypt and Rome. Antony spent the winter of 41 to 40 BC with Cleopatra in Alexandria, indulging in lavish feasts, intellectual discussions, and passionate romance. They solidified their alliance, with Antony promising to protect Egypt and Cleopatra agreeing to provide him with resources for his military campaigns. In 40 BC, Cleopatra gave birth to twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, fathered by Antony. Their birth further cemented the bond between Cleopatra and Antony, and symbolized the union of East and West. Antony publicly acknowledged his paternity, further defying Roman tradition and fueling the growing animosity between him and Octavian. For the next several years, Antony and Cleopatra ruled their respective territories, consolidating their power and preparing for the inevitable clash with Octavian. Antony campaigned in the east, battling the Parthians and expanding Roman influence, while Cleopatra focused on strengthening Egypt's economy and military. They continued to support each other, exchanging resources and coordinating their strategies. However, their relationship was increasingly viewed with suspicion and hostility in Rome. Octavian, a shrewd and ambitious politician, skillfully exploited the growing resentment towards Antony, portraying him as a traitor who had abandoned Rome for the allure of an Egyptian queen. He accused Antony of neglecting his duties, squandering Roman resources, and plotting to establish a new empire in the east with Cleopatra as his queen. The propaganda campaign against Antony was highly effective. The Roman people, already wary of foreign influence, were easily swayed by Octavian's accusations. They saw Antony as a puppet of Cleopatra, a man who had succumbed to the charms of a foreign woman and betrayed the interests of Rome. In 32 BC, the Second Triumvirate officially dissolved, and Rome was plunged into civil war. Octavian declared war on Cleopatra, accusing her of seducing Antony and conspiring against the Roman Republic. The stage was set for a final decisive confrontation between East and West. The forces of Octavian and Antony clashed at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC. The battle was fought at sea, off the coast of Greece, and involved a massive fleet of ships from both sides. Cleopatra personally commanded the Egyptian fleet, while Antony led the Roman forces loyal to him. The Battle of Actium was a disaster for Antony and Cleopatra. Octavian's fleet, commanded by the skilled Admiral Agrippa, outmaneuvered and outfought the combined forces of Egypt and Rome. Cleopatra, seeing that the battle was lost, ordered her fleet to break through the Roman lines and escape. Antony, abandoning his troops, followed Cleopatra in a separate ship. The retreat of Cleopatra and Antony demoralized their remaining forces, who were quickly overwhelmed by Octavian's superior forces. The Battle of Actium marked the end of Antony's power and the beginning of Octavian's rise to absolute control of Rome. Antony and Cleopatra fled back to Egypt, where they prepared for Octavian's inevitable invasion. They knew that their defeat at Actium meant the end of their reign, and they desperately sought a way to secure their legacy and protect their children. Octavian invaded Egypt in 30 BC. He met little resistance, as Antony's remaining forces quickly surrendered or defected to Octavian's side. Antony, despairing of his situation, committed suicide by falling on his sword. Cleopatra, knowing that she would soon be captured and paraded through the streets of Rome as a trophy of war, chose to take her own life rather than submit to Octavian's humiliation. She locked herself in her mausoleum with her loyal attendants and, according to tradition, allowed herself to be bitten by an asp, a venomous snake sacred to the Egyptian goddess Isis. Octavian, upon entering Alexandria, found Cleopatra dead. He was reportedly impressed by her courage and dignity, but he showed no remorse for her demise. He had achieved his goal of defeating his rivals and establishing himself as the sole ruler of Rome. With the deaths of Antony and Cleopatra, Egypt became a Roman province, ending the Ptolemaic dynasty that had ruled for nearly 300 years. Octavian, later known as Augustus, consolidated his power and established the Roman Empire, ushering in a new era of peace and prosperity. Caesarion, Cleopatra's son by Julius Caesar, posed a potential threat to Octavian's rule. Octavian, ever the pragmatist, ordered Caesarion's execution, eliminating any future claim to the throne of Egypt or Rome. Cleopatra's other children, Alexander Helios, Cleopatra Selene, and Ptolemy Philadelphus, were spared and taken to Rome, where they were raised by Octavian's sister Octavia. Cleopatra Selene eventually married Juba II, the king of Mauritania, a Roman client state in North Africa. They ruled Mauritania together, promoting Roman culture and fostering trade and diplomacy. The deaths of Antony and Cleopatra marked the end of an era, the end of the Roman Republic, and the end of Egypt's independence. Their story, a tale of love, ambition, and betrayal, continues to fascinate and inspire to this day. Cleopatra, the last queen of Egypt, remains an iconic figure, a symbol of beauty, intelligence, and political power, but her reign and her life ended in defeat and despair. The sands of Egypt shifted, and the Roman eagles flew over the land of the pharaohs.